Hey everybody, Tony D with a screenwriting tip, and today we're going to talk about comedy. Why is it so hard to write comedy in these days? Now, the obvious answer you will probably say, oh, you're going to say it's because everything's so woke and wonderful and people have killed comedy. That is a huge factor right now. But understand, I've always said, the wokeness is a trend. It's just a trend. We've gone through the trend before. This one's particularly bad um, because social media has exacerbated to a huge degree. I was just watching somebody doing a video about Sarah Silverman, and it was funny to see, them contrast all her various woke statements with all the very un-PC moments in her comedy. I think Sarah's pretty outrageous, but I think she's a bit of a hypocrite for calling out other people for doing things that probably are jokes for the most part. But, to her, she's offended. It offends her poor sensibilities now. And again, I think that's kind of a trend. I think it's more that it feels like she's more like trolling for that than anything else. And that maybe because of her past outrageous, things she's done blackface, she's dressed up as the leader of the bad guys in World War II Germany, and she's done all sorts of really awful, quote unquote meta comedy. I don't say it's awful in terms of it was bad. I'm saying it's awful in terms of it was meant to be offensive. And I've met Sarah a couple of times, and this was way back before she was famous, and she was purposely very offensive, and that was part of her comedy. I mean, to me, that was always part of her comedy, being a kind of offensive and edgy, and that's how she became successful. That's how her comedy was successful. So you kind of got to keep that in mind when you're doing comedy. You got to be a little edgy, or else it's not funny. If it's not a little dangerous, what are you doing? You're just going through the motions. There's got to be something in your comedy when you write something that people go, oh no, oh no, oh no. Because that kind of moment is what every comedian lives for, because that's what's going to push people into a big belly laugh. So yes, the wokeness does hurt things quite a bit, but the wokeness is going away. It's a trend. I think there's a bigger issue to talk about that has crept up on us that a lot of people don't really see, and I've talked about this in other videos with regards to other things. Comedy is, there's a shared experience in comedy. That's how the jokes connect. If you don't understand, if I make a joke about, I don't know, owning a dog, and it's a real specific breed, and it's a real specific thing to that particular breed, you might not get it, right? It's a little too, it's too specific. Because there's only so many people that have that particular breed of dog, and you might go, well, I don't really get that. Whereas if I make a sort of general joke that can apply to dogs, but it really applies to all pets, most people, if they don't have a pet, they either had one or they understand the concept of pets, and that's a broader audience. If I just make a joke that would relate to anyone who's ever met an animal, that's even broader and even more people will get it. So the shared experience is important in comedy. If it's too specific, it might resonate with that crowd, that tiny crowd, but it's not going to make people laugh. So part of the problem with doing woke comedy in this trendy era of being woke is a lot of Hollywood has drilled down into, we need marginalized groups and we have to do jokes about that, and that's what's going to be funny. The problem is if you drill too far down into those specific problems for those specific groups, only people in those groups will get your jokes. So no one's going to laugh. So, if you are, trans, there's a way to make a trans joke that everybody can get, or there's a way to make a trans joke that only trans people get, right? Because if you know trans people or you are trans, then you know there are specific things like, it's like when Jeff Foxworthy does, you're a redneck when, right? That resonates with people from the South, and there are a lot of them. But when you do, you're a trans person when, that's only going to resonate with a tiny minority. It's a tiny audience. Whereas if you look at the trailer for this new movie it's called Lazy Susan, and the main character's trans, it's not about her being trans, it's about her being lazy, which is a very broad concept that everyone can get behind, because we've all been lazy or we've known people who are lazy, and it's about Susan not really wanting to work, and that's another concept we can all get behind. It's about jobs, and it's just very funny trailer I looked at a few weeks back before the big crisis. So there is a presentation that you have to be keenly aware of when you're doing comedy, and it's that shared experience where you connect with people so you can make the comedy work. And you can bring people down into obscure areas of society and get them to laugh and learn things. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a balance. If you go too far down the rabbit hole, you lose people and they go, I don't know what I'm watching now. I can't relate to that. Comedy always has to be relatable. That's why so many comedians do jokes about relationships and bodily functions and having sex and, all the big themes that almost every single famous stand-up comic does. It's very rare that you have a successful stand-up comic that's going to do something, do a stand-up bit that's so obscure that that bit becomes famous, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, it has to be different, but it can't be obscure, and this is part of the reason that you should remember that in screenwriting, when you write a comedy, understand that you're probably limiting yourself in terms of, can you sell that comedic screenplay? Because in the world of distribution and production, comedy movies don't translate well overseas, and that's because the shared experience there is different. In different cultures, people have different school systems. They have different family lives. They have different finances. They just have different lives. And if your very American movie, about, say, a coming of age in an American high school, a lot of that will be lost upon somebody who said, I don't know, grew up in, say, Mexico, who, went to a school system that was very different, or, doesn't understand the various nuances of America. Someone in Asia, same thing. Someone in India, someone in Russia. They all have their own sort of cultural things, and that may, they may know it sort of instinctively because American culture is very pervasive. They may have read online about what a prom is, but they may not actually understand all the nuances of what going to prom is, that it's, the night everybody gets laid, or, high school is a big joke to people for the most part, and really, senior year is just a total wank off, and they're just getting ready to go to college, and everybody's been blowing things off, or, that 18 is a big age, and you can drink, and, in other countries, those ages are a little different. You might have to grow up faster in other countries, in other cultures. They wouldn't understand all the cues. So, but that doesn't mean you can't have a successful comedy, coming of age comedy in high school and sell it overseas if you concentrate on, say, universal themes like, about a student who wants to win the girl of his dreams. Like, that's a theme most cultures, 99% of them, are going to get behind, because it's like, oh, okay, it's about love. It's not really about the high school. The high school's the setting, but really it's about this guy trying to win the love of his life, and for whatever reason it's hilarious. And so you've got a movie that anyone can relate to. So it's something you need to think about when you're sitting down to write your comedy and understand who the audience is. Because if the audience is too obscure, you're kind of wasting your time. No producer is going to look at your screenplay and go, yeah, well, this is what we need to do, a comedy about chimney sweeps in the 18th century. Like, nah, that's not going to really work. That's not going to resonate with people. But if you say, well, it's about people in the 1800s, but it's really about this guy trying to win this girl, okay, maybe. Or maybe if it's about something obscure as, I don't know, I'm doing the Pineys. And that's a pretty obscure thing. The whole Pineys, the phrase the Pineys, the Jersey Devil legend, it's a bit obscure in terms of the various legends and whatnot. But what's not obscure is the hunting. Hunting isn't obscure. Hunting is sort of a universal theme. So that's more of the emphasis of the book than necessarily all the trappings of the Jersey Devil and all the legends and whatnot. That's kind of like icing on the cake. And the relationships are what really matter in my story than and the fact they're all cousins and there's this giant family. It's kind of more family driven than it really is the other stuff in terms of the comedy. But and that's something people can relate to. Now, somebody in a small family, maybe they can't relate to it totally, but they understand what families are. I mean, everybody understands what family is. So it's something to consider when you're building your comedy and building what you hope to be a good screenplay. So even if you do something obscure, remember to try to keep the comedy fairly broad, or at least broad enough that there's an audience, and bring people into the world. I mean, that's really true with any screenplay when you think about it. You have to bring people into a world that they, on the one hand, they're learning about, but on the other hand, it feels very much like something familiar. So there's that balance there. And I think there's a balance with comedy. And comedy is the hardest thing to write. It really is. I mean, you've got the timing, you've got the delivery, and that's very hard to get across on the written page. I've written some stuff that I thought was just so damn hilarious. And it just goes right past the producers, and some of that is just that the written word can't really portray it. Sometimes it's just nearly impossible. Or if you explain every sort of nuance of it, it doesn't come together. They're not picturing it in their head. You'd actually have to perform some of it for them to get it. It's that sort of complex, But, hopefully if you write a screenplay and it's comedy driven and you have funny people around you, you can kind of sell it that way. Especially if you've got stand-up comedians involved, if you've got a famous stand-up comedian involved, or you write it for a particular stand-up comic and his brand of comedy, depending on who he is. You can sell it that way. I mean, that is a way to go. So, for instance, when I went out to LA and I was shopping stuff around, I stumbled in one of the offices, and the producer, after I had tried to pitch a bunch of stuff, said, well, I'm only really developing stuff for Cheech Marin. So Cheech Marin, for those of you who don't know, Cheech of Cheech and Chong, he was looking for particular things to develop. He wasn't even developing comedies at that time. He ended up, I don't think he was developing comedies at that time. He ended up on like Nash Bridges and some other shows, which, he was probably, I've never really even seen Nash Bridges, but I think he was the comedy relief on that show to some degree. And, even if you're going to do a comedy show for a guy like him, it's going to be geared very specifically. Even if you were going to do like Cheech, the sitcom, you were going to have to do something very specific to him. You'd have to understand his comedy, how he rolls it out. The fact that he plays a guy who's always a little sketchy, always a little high, has this accent, and and you'd have to know his delivery to hear the voice in your head. So when people read it, they could hear Cheech's voice coming off the paper, as it were. Dave's not here, man. No, that's Chong. That's the response. But if you're going to do it, just keep those things in mind, grounded in reality, and bring us in and make the comedy connect, and hope for the best. Hope that the producer you show your screenplay to can actually get it. And let me tell you something, it's really, really tough. It's way tougher than selling a regular. It's easy to sell like a horror movie or drama. Almost every other screenplay is easier. Comedy is hard.